My parents dismissed my student achievement gala that morning, telling me to stop dreaming as they grabbed their car keys, insisting they had to drive 2 hours to Quincy to console my sister Amy, who had gotten into yet another screaming match with her deadbeat boyfriend. This was the third time that month. I stood alone on that stage at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Ballroom, accepting both the Academic Excellence Award and the Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University, while they sat in Amy's cramped studio apartment, probably listening to her cry about some boy who couldn't hold a job. My father's former mentor, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, who now served as Dean of Boston University, took a photo of me holding the Crystal Trophy and the scholarship certificate, then posted it in my dad's corporate WhatsApp group with the caption, "Richard, you must be incredibly proud. Victoria is the first student in 30 years from our program to receive the Rhodes. Exceptional young woman you've raised." My phone exploded with 47 missed calls from my father that evening, but I was far too engaged at the private celebration dinner that Dr. Whitmore had organized, sitting directly beside the same man my father had spent decades trying to impress, who was now offering to write me a personal recommendation letter for Harvard Law School. The ballroom had been packed with Boston's academic elite, university presidents, former Rhodes scholars, and corporate leaders who funded these scholarships. I had walked up to that stage in the dress I'd bought with my own money from working 20 hours a week at the university library, while my parents were probably buying Amy another overpriced latte to calm her down. The selection committee chair had called my dissertation proposal on international corporate law the most sophisticated work we've seen from an undergraduate in recent memory. Everyone applauded, everyone except the two people who should have been there. Dr. Whitmore had approached me immediately after the ceremony, his distinguished silver hair and sharp blue eyes showing genuine warmth. "Victoria, I had no idea Richard's daughter was you. He and I go way back. He was one of my brightest students 30 years ago." He paused, studying my face. "Though I must say, you've surpassed anything he accomplished at your age. Where are your parents?" I'd love to congratulate them. I kept my smile perfectly composed, years of disappointment having taught me excellent emotional control. "They had a family emergency. My sister needed them." The lie tasted bitter, but it was cleaner than the truth. Something shifted in Dr. Whitmore's expression, a flash of understanding that told me he knew exactly what kind of emergency would make parents miss this moment. "Well then, you'll join me for dinner. I'm hosting a small gathering for this year's scholarship recipients at Duzav. Several Harvard law professors will be there. I insist." That dinner changed everything. While my phone vibrated continuously in my purse with my father's increasingly frantic calls, I sat between Dr. Whitmore and Professor Catherine Morrison from Harvard Law, discussing my plans for Oxford and my eventual legal career. Professor Morrison, a formidable woman in her 60s who had argued before the Supreme Court, seemed fascinated by my research interests. "International corporate law with a focus on family business succession disputes," she mused. "That's quite specific for someone your age. Personal interest?" I smiled, taking a sip of the wine Dr. Whitmore had ordered. "You could say I've had a front row seat to certain family dynamics that inspired my academic focus." Dr. Whitmore laughed, not knowing how literal I was being. "Victoria has that rare combination of brilliant analytical mind and practical wisdom. Richard must have passed on his strategic thinking." "Perhaps," I said softly, watching my phone light up again with my father's name. Call number 48. Though I've learned that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from observing what not to do. The table grew quiet for a moment, but Professor Morrison's eyes sparkled with approval. She leaned closer. "I like you, Victoria. When you return from Oxford, look me up. I might have a position in my firm for someone with your particular insight into family dynamics and corporate law." Break tick-tock. As dessert arrived, my father's 50th call came through. This time, I answered, putting the phone on speaker so softly only I could hear. His voice was panicked, desperate, nothing like the dismissive tone from that morning. "Victoria, where are you? We need to talk." "Dr. Whitmore posted your picture. The entire executive team at Brightwell Consulting saw it. My boss called me. Everyone's asking why I wasn't there for my daughter's Rhodes Scholarship. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" I watched the candles flicker on our table, surrounded by people who had celebrated my achievement while my own parents had chosen to miss it for my sister's recurring drama. "I'm having dinner with Dr. Whitmore and some colleagues. I'll be home late." "Don't wait up." "Victoria, please, we made a mistake. Your mother is sick about it. We can fix this." "I'm sure you can," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. You've always been good at fixing things that matter to you. I hung up before he could respond, turned off my phone completely, and returned my attention to the table where Dr. Whitmore was sharing stories about Oxford. He caught my eye and smiled, raising his glass slightly in a private toast. Something in that gesture told me he understood far more than he was saying. What my father didn't know yet was that Dr. Whitmore sat on the board of Brightwell Consulting, the very company where my father had been desperately angling for a senior vice president promotion for the past 3 years. And what neither of my parents knew was that their choice that morning had just shifted every power dynamic in our family in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, I returned to my parents' house in Brookline to collect some belongings before moving into my new apartment near campus. My mother, Patricia, sat at the kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes, while my father paced near the window, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Amy sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the tension. "Victoria, sweetheart, we need to talk about yesterday," my mother began, her voice trembling with what I recognized as performative guilt rather than genuine remorse. I set my coffee mug down with deliberate care. "There's nothing to discuss. You made your choice." "Your sister was in crisis," my father interjected, his executive voice faltering. "She needed us." I looked at Amy, who hadn't even glanced up from her phone. "Amy, what was the emergency yesterday that required both parents to drive 2 hours immediately?" She finally looked up, confused. "What?" "Oh, Jake said he wanted to take a break. But we're back together now. He apologized this morning." The silence that followed was exquisite. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened as the reality of their decision crystallized. They had missed the most important moment of my academic career for a relationship drama that had resolved itself within 18 hours. "Dr. Whitmore mentioned you were his student, Dad," I said, gathering my things. "He seems disappointed he didn't get to meet you yesterday. He said something about discussing your upcoming performance review with the board next month." My father's face drained of color. "Victoria, please. I'll talk to Jonathan. I'll explain." "Explain what? That your daughter's Rhodes Scholarship was less important than your other daughter's temporary boyfriend problem?" I shouldered my bag. "I'm sure he'll understand completely. After all, he only told everyone at dinner that family values are the cornerstone of executive leadership." My mother reached for my arm. "Don't do this, Victoria. Don't punish us." I pulled away gently. "I'm not punishing anyone, Mom. I'm simply living my life. You taught me that family obligations are flexible depending on what's most convenient at the moment." I walked toward the door, but my father blocked my path, desperation replacing his usual corporate composure. "What do you want? An apology? We're sorry. We made a mistake. What do I need to do?" What he needed to do was impossible. He needed to go back 22 years and be the father who showed up. But since time travel didn't exist, I simply smiled. "Nothing, Dad. You don't need to do anything." The confusion on his face was almost amusing. He'd expected me to leverage this moment, to demand something, to negotiate. He didn't understand yet that I'd stopped caring about their validation years ago. This wasn't about extracting apologies or promises they'd never keep. This was about them finally experiencing consequences. Over the next week, the fallout began spreading through my father's professional network. Dr. Whitmore's WhatsApp post had been shared and discussed extensively. Colleagues from Brightwell Consulting kept approaching my father with congratulations about his brilliant daughter, each conversation a subtle reminder that he hadn't been present for her achievement. His boss, Martin Caldwell, mentioned it during their Monday strategy meeting, expressing surprise that Richard hadn't mentioned Victoria's Rhodes Scholarship during their weekly check-ins. "I had no idea your daughter was such an exceptional student, Richard," Martin said in front of the entire senior team. "Dr. Whitmore speaks very highly of her, says she's the brightest young legal mind he's encountered in his 40-year career." My father smiled tightly, unable to admit he'd missed the actual ceremony. "Victoria has always been driven. You must have been beaming with pride at the gala," another executive added. "My daughter attended as well. She said the ballroom was incredible. Did Patricia enjoy the ceremony?" I heard about this conversation later from Sarah Chen, a junior analyst at Brightwell who'd become friendly with me through mutual connections. She had been sitting in that meeting, watching my father's careful evasions, and she'd immediately understood what had happened. Sarah had her own history with neglectful parents who prioritized her brother's mediocrity over her excellence. "Your father looked like he wanted to disappear," Sarah told me over coffee. Martin kept pressing for details about the ceremony. Richard kept deflecting. Finally, Dr. Whitmore himself walked into the meeting. My heart rate picked up slightly. Whitmore was there. Board meeting ran long. so he stopped by to say hello to the executive team. Martin immediately congratulated him on mentoring such a brilliant student. Whitmore looked directly at your father and said, "Yes, though I had to celebrate Victoria's achievement without her parents. Family emergency," she told me, though she handled herself with remarkable grace considering. The professional damage had begun, but I hadn't orchestrated it. I'd simply allowed the truth to exist in spaces where my father had built his reputation on family values and balanced priorities. Brightwell Consulting's entire brand centered on holistic leadership and executive wellness through family commitment. My father had given presentations about work-life balance. He'd written internal memos about prioritizing what mattered, and now everyone knew he'd missed his daughter's Rhodes Scholarship ceremony. My mother called 3 times that week. I answered once, keeping my voice pleasantly neutral. "Mom, I'm quite busy with graduation preparations and Oxford arrangements." "Victoria, your father is having a difficult time at work. People are asking questions." "Questions about what?" Her silence stretched uncomfortably. "About why we weren't at your ceremony. That seems like a reasonable question." "Why weren't you?" "We've explained that. Amy needed us." I let the silence hang between us, forcing her to hear how hollow that justification sounded when spoken aloud to someone who wasn't going to accept it anymore. Finally, I said, "I need to go, Mom. I have a meeting with Professor Morrison about summer research opportunities." "Catherine Morrison? From Harvard Law?" The shift in her tone was immediate, from guilt to strategic interest. "Victoria, that's wonderful. Your father knows several people who work with her firm." "I'm aware. Dr. Whitmore introduced us. He's been incredibly supportive." Another silence, this one heavier with implication. My mother wasn't stupid. She understood that Dr. Whitmore's support came with professional access that my father desperately needed for his career advancement. And that access now flowed through me. "Perhaps we could have dinner," she suggested carefully. "The 4 of us. You could tell us about your Oxford plans." "I'll check my calendar. Things are quite hectic right now." I hung up before she could press further. Amy texted me later that day with a message that crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamic. "Mom says mad about them missing her award thing. Can you get over it? They feel bad and Dad's stressed about work." I didn't respond. Amy had been coddled her entire life, her failures cushioned and excused while my successes were treated as expected and therefore unremarkable. She genuinely couldn't comprehend why missing a Rhodes Scholarship ceremony might be significant, because she'd never accomplished anything that required her parents to make sacrifices or choices. Dr. Whitmore invited me to lunch at the Harvard Club the following week. We sat in the elegant dining room overlooking Commonwealth Avenue, and he was remarkably direct. "Your father has requested a meeting with me about the senior vice president position he's been pursuing." I set down my fork carefully. "I wasn't aware you were involved in those decisions. The board provides input on executive promotions. I've known Richard for 30 years, Victoria. He was genuinely talented as a young man, but somewhere along the way, he lost sight of what matters." Dr. Whitmore studied me with those sharp blue eyes. "I'm not going to interfere with your family relationships, but I am curious about something. What do you want from all this?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. He was offering me power, influence over my father's career trajectory. All I had to do was indicate what outcome I preferred. I said slowly, choosing my words with precision, "for people to experience the natural consequences of their choices without interference or protection. I think that's fair, don't you?" Dr. Whitmore smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Remarkably fair. Your father taught a seminar once on accountability in leadership. I believe his thesis was that executives must model integrity in all aspects of their lives. That does sound like something he would say." "Indeed." He signaled for the check. "I have that board meeting next month where we'll discuss the SVP position. Several strong candidates. Richard's been the frontrunner, but lately questions have emerged about his judgment and priorities." I said nothing, simply met his gaze with calm acknowledgement. "You're going to do extraordinary things at Oxford, Victoria," he continued. "And I suspect when you return, you'll find opportunities waiting that others your age couldn't dream of. Doors open for people who understand how the world actually works." As we stood to leave, he paused. "Your father called me 5 times this week. Wanted to explain about the ceremony. I haven't returned his calls." "Why not?" "Because some things can't be explained away, Victoria. Some mistakes reveal character in ways that no amount of professional competence can overcome." 3 weeks later, I graduated summa cum laude from Boston University with a triple major in political science, economics, and philosophy. My parents attended this ceremony, sitting in the auditorium with forced smiles while Amy complained about the length of the program. Dr. Whitmore delivered the commencement address, speaking eloquently about character, sacrifice, and the difference between success and significance. True leadership, he said from the podium, his voice carrying across the crowd, requires us to prioritize what genuinely matters, not what's merely convenient or comfortable. The students graduating today have made countless sacrifices to reach this moment. They deserve families who recognize and honor those sacrifices. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several people in our section turned to congratulate him on my achievements, each interaction a fresh reminder of what he'd missed 3 weeks earlier. The difference between this ceremony and the Rhodes event was stark. This was obligatory, expected. The other had been extraordinary. At the reception afterward, my parents tried to monopolize my time, positioning themselves for photos, introducing me to their friends as our brilliant daughter who's going to Oxford. I watched this performance with clinical detachment, noting how easily they claimed credit for achievements they'd barely acknowledged until public recognition made them valuable. Professor Morrison approached us with Dr. Whitmore, and my father's demeanor shifted instantly into professional networking mode. Jonathan, Catherine, wonderful to see you both. We're so grateful for your mentorship of Victoria. Are you? Dr. Whitmore's tone was perfectly polite, but something underneath cut like a blade. I wasn't aware you'd been particularly involved in Victoria's academic journey. My mother jumped in quickly. Oh, we've always supported her education. Richard and I made sure she had every opportunity. I see. Professor Morrison's cool gaze assessed my parents with the same analytical precision she probably used in cross-examination. Victoria mentioned she worked 20 hours weekly at the library to fund her research materials and conference travel. That must have built remarkable character. The implication landed perfectly. My father had bought Amy a new car last year when she wrecked her previous one driving drunk. He'd paid for her apartment, her tuition, her endless stream of emergencies, but I'd worked to fund the extras that made me competitive for Oxford because he'd told me it would build discipline. We believe in teaching our children self-sufficiency, my father said, his executive smooth-talking deployed at full force. Of course, Dr. Whitmore replied, though I wonder if both children received the same lessons in self-sufficiency, or if certain expectations varied depending on which daughter required instruction. The conversation continued in this vein, pleasant on the surface but laced with pointed observations that left my parents increasingly uncomfortable. I said very little, allowing Dr. Whitmore and Professor Morrison to conduct what was essentially a professional evisceration disguised as polite small talk. When they finally excused themselves, my father turned to me with barely contained frustration. What have you been telling them about our family? Nothing but the truth, Dad. Why? Is the truth problematic? Victoria, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop. My career is suffering because of your resentment over one missed event. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. One event? Is that how you're framing this? You know what I mean. The gala. We've apologized. What more do you want? What I wanted was impossible to articulate because it wasn't about one event. It was about 22 years of being the daughter who didn't need emotional support because I was handling things fine. It was about every academic award that was met with good job, while Amy's mediocre report cards earned family celebrations. It was about being told my research presentations were boring, while Amy's stories about her social drama received rapt attention. It was about working 20 hours a week while watching my sister receive an allowance for accomplishing nothing. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smiled and said, I want you to experience what I've experienced, Dad. The feeling that your achievements and struggles matter less than someone else's convenience. His face darkened. You're deliberately sabotaging me. I'm doing nothing. I'm going to Oxford, building my career, forming relationships with people who value my work. If that somehow creates problems for you, perhaps you should examine why. My mother placed a hand on my arm, her grip tight. Victoria, enough. You're being cruel. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. Cruel was missing the Rhodes ceremony. Cruel was prioritizing Amy's recurring boyfriend drama over my once-in-a-lifetime achievement. Cruel was spending 22 years making me feel like my accomplishments were expected and therefore unremarkable while treating Amy's basic functioning as worthy of celebration. I'm being honest, Mom. If that feels cruel to you, maybe you should consider what that says about the foundation you've built this family on. I walked away before either could respond, joining a group of my classmates who were taking photos near the library, where I'd spent countless hours working while my parents funded Amy's lifestyle. Sarah Chen waved me over, her own parents conspicuously absent from the ceremony. Your parents look stressed, she observed, handing me a glass of champagne. They're realizing actions have consequences. Novel experience for them. Sarah laughed darkly. My mom called yesterday to complain that I didn't invite them to graduation. I reminded her she didn't invite me to my brother's wedding last year because it was family only. Apparently, I don't count as family when it's inconvenient. We clinked glasses, two daughters who'd learned to build lives without the parents who'd failed them. The difference was that I now held cards my father desperately needed, and I had no intention of playing them in his favor. The following week, my father's promotion decision was postponed. Martin Caldwell called him into a meeting and explained that the board had concerns about leadership alignment with company values. My father knew exactly what that meant. Dr. Whitmore had raised questions, and those questions had weight. He showed up at my new apartment unannounced, an act of desperation so unlike him that I almost felt something resembling pity. Almost. Victoria, please. Talk to Dr. Whitmore. Tell him this is between us. Not professional. I stood in my doorway, not inviting him inside. Why would I do that? Because I'm your father. Because family supports each other. The hypocrisy was stunning. Family supports each other? Is that what you were doing when you missed my rose ceremony? When you've spent my entire life making me feel like my achievements don't matter as much as Amy's problems? That's not fair. We've supported you. You've provided financial support, Dad. That's not the same as emotional support or recognition or priority. You've treated me like a background character in Amy's dramatic production of a life. His face crumpled slightly, a crack in his executive armor. I know we've made mistakes. I know we haven't always gotten it right. But you're destroying my career over this. I'm not destroying anything. You destroyed it yourself by making choices that revealed who you are when it matters. Dr. Whitmore didn't need me to explain anything. He saw your absence and understood perfectly. So that's it? You're just going to let my career implode because we missed one ceremony? I stepped back, preparing to close the door. No, Dad. I'm going to let your career develop naturally based on the choices you've made and the character you've demonstrated. That's called accountability. I believe you gave a seminar on it once. I closed the door on his protests, listening to him knock and call my name for several minutes before finally leaving. My phone rang immediately. Then again. Then text messages from my mother, from Amy, all demanding I fix this as though I'd broken something rather than simply stopped protecting them from consequences. That evening, Professor Morrison called. Victoria, I wanted to give you a heads up. I've been asked to provide input on the Brightwell SVP selection. Dr. Whitmore mentioned your father is a candidate. I see. I'm going to be honest with you. Based on what I've observed about his priorities and judgment, I can't in good conscience recommend him for a position requiring exemplary leadership. I wanted you to know this comes from my professional assessment, not personal favoritism toward you. I understand, Professor. I appreciate your integrity. You're not going to ask me to reconsider? Why would I? You're evaluating him based on merit and character. That seems appropriate. She was quiet for a moment. You're going to be formidable at Oxford, Victoria, and absolutely terrifying in a courtroom someday. After we hung up, I stood at my apartment window, looking out over Boston, thinking about the intricate web of consequences spreading from one seemingly simple choice. My parents had thought missing the gala was a minor decision, easily apologized for and forgotten. They hadn't understood that it was the final stone in a cairn I'd been building my entire life, the accumulated weight of being second priority finally becoming too heavy to carry. And now that weight was shifting onto them, and they were discovering they couldn't bear it any better than I had. My phone buzzed with another message from Amy. Seriously, Vic, stop being such a bitch. Dad's losing his job BC of UU, or ruining our family. I blocked her number without responding. Our family had been ruined long before I stopped accepting crumbs and started demanding the respect I'd earned. The board meeting happened on a Thursday in late June. I was in my apartment packing for Oxford when Sarah texted me. Board meeting today. Your dad looked like he was walking to his execution this morning. I continued folding clothes, placing them carefully in my suitcase. Professor Morrison had helped arrange a research assistant position at Oxford that would cover my living expenses beyond the scholarship. Dr. Whitmore had written me 3 additional letters of recommendation for various opportunities. My future was crystallizing beautifully while my father's crumbled. At 3:47 p.m., my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. Voicemail. Then my mother again. On her 4th attempt, I answered. Victoria, thank God. They passed him over. Martin gave the promotion to Jennifer Stokes instead. Your father is devastated. He worked for this for 3 years. Jennifer is excellent, I said calmly, continuing to pack. She's published 2 books on sustainable business practices and has impeccable client satisfaction ratings. That's not the point. The point is that Dr. Whitmore sabotaged your father's career because we missed your ceremony. This is insane, Victoria. You have to fix this. I don't have to do anything, Mom. And Dr. Whitmore didn't sabotage Dad's career. He simply declined to support someone whose actions contradict the values Dad claims to embody. Values? This is about vindictiveness. You're punishing us. I sat down on my bed, suddenly tired of pretending this was complicated. No, Mom. Punishment would be me actively destroying Dad's career. I'm not doing that. I'm simply not helping him avoid the natural consequences of his choices. There's a difference. Natural consequences? Victoria, he might lose his job entirely. Martin suggested he take a sabbatical to reassess his priorities. Do you understand what that means? It means his employer is questioning whether he's the right fit for their organizational culture. That's a reasonable response when someone's personal behavior contradicts their professional messaging. My mother's voice turned cold. When did you become so heartless? The question almost made me laugh. Heartless. I'd worked 20-hour weeks while carrying a full course load and triple major. I'd written every paper, attended every class, earned every accolade through relentless work. I'd done all of this while watching my parents pour money and attention into Amy's repeated failures. And I was heartless for not rescuing my father from consequences he'd earned. I learned from the best, Mom. You and Dad taught me that family support is conditional and flexible. I'm just applying those lessons. I hung up before she could respond. 30 minutes later, my father appeared at my door again, and this time he looked genuinely broken. His tie was loosened, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. "They're forcing me out," he said without preamble. Paid sabbatical for 6 months, then a transition to new opportunities. He'd corporate speak for firing me without the liability. I leaned against my doorframe, not inviting him in. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because you could stop this with one conversation." "Could I? What would I say, Dad? That you're actually a devoted father who just happened to miss the most important academic achievement of my life because your other daughter's boyfriend needed consoling? That your priorities perfectly align with the family-centered leadership Brightwell promotes? You could tell them the truth. That we made one mistake." "One mistake," I repeated. "That's really how you see this? One isolated error in judgment?" His face hardened. "What do you want me to say, Victoria? That I've been a terrible father? That I prioritized Amy over you? Fine. I admit it. I screwed up. Does that satisfy you? Can we move past this now?" "Move past it to what, exactly? To you keeping a job based on credentials you haven't actually earned? Dad, if your career depended on you demonstrating family values through your actions, and your actions revealed the opposite, then you don't deserve that career. It's simple." "Nothing about this is simple. I have a mortgage, retirement plans, financial obligations. Your mother and I have built a life. Amy still needs support through college." There it was. Amy still needs support. Even now, even in this moment of crisis, his concern circled back to my sister, who'd failed her way through 2 years of community college, while I'd earned a Rhodes Scholarship. "Amy is 23 years old and hasn't passed a single semester of college," I said quietly. "Maybe what she needs isn't more support. Maybe she needs to experience consequences too." My father's expression shifted through several emotions: anger, desperation, something that might have been recognition. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? This isn't just about the ceremony. You've been planning this." "I haven't planned anything, Dad. I've just stopped protecting you from reality. There's a difference. Dr. Whitmore is on the board because of me. I introduced him to Martin 5 years ago. That connection got Brightwell access to BU's executive education programs, and now he's using that position to destroy me. He's using that position to evaluate candidates honestly. If that evaluation reflects poorly on you, perhaps the problem isn't Dr. Whitmore's judgment." We stood there in my doorway, father and daughter, separated by far more than 3 feet of physical space. Everything unspoken over 22 years seemed to crystallize in that silence. All the times he'd dismissed my achievements as expected. All the times he'd rushed to Amy's aid while telling me to handle things myself. All the accumulated weight of being the daughter who didn't need him because she was too competent to require attention. "I used to be proud of you," he said finally. "Proud that you were so independent, so capable. Now I see that I mistook your coping mechanism for strength." The observation was so close to accurate that I almost softened. Almost. But recognition without change meant nothing. "You're right, Dad. I learned to be independent because depending on you was consistently disappointing. And now you're learning what it feels like when the people you expect to support you choose not to. Consider it educational." I closed the door gently, professionally, the same way I imagined closing a case file after a successful litigation. Behind the door, I heard him stand there for several minutes before finally leaving. That night, I received an email from Dr. Whitmore with the subject line, Oxford preparation. Inside was a detailed list of contacts, resources, and opportunities at Oxford, plus an introduction to Professor David Sterling, who ran the International Corporate Law program where I'd be studying. At the bottom was a personal note. Victoria, your father called me today asking me to reconsider my assessment of his candidacy for the SVP position. I thought you should know that I made my decision based purely on professional evaluation of character and judgment. Your family dynamics, while informative, were not the determining factor. I've simply recognized what I should have seen years ago, that Richard talks extensively about values he doesn't practice. You owe me nothing, and I want to be clear that my support of your career is because you've earned it, not because of any family situation. Looking forward to hearing about your successes at Oxford. Best regards, Jonathan. I read it 3 times, absorbing the message underneath the professional language. Dr. Whitmore was absolving me of responsibility for my father's career implosion, while simultaneously confirming that he'd seen through my father's carefully constructed facade. The man my father had spent 30 years trying to impress had finally evaluated him honestly, and that evaluation had been devastating. My mother left a voicemail that night, her voice thick with tears. Victoria, please call me back. Your father is drinking, which he never does. He won't talk to me. Amy is furious with you. Our family is falling apart. I'm begging you to help us. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the full message. Our family had been falling apart for years, just slowly and quietly enough that they'd never noticed. They were only paying attention now because the consequences were finally reaching them. Sarah texted me later. Heard through the office that your dad cleaned out his desk today. Also heard that Jennifer Stokes found documentation of him claiming credit for junior analyst work during his SVP candidacy review. Your dad apparently inflated his contributions to several major projects. So there it was. Dr. Whitmore's assessment had triggered a deeper investigation, which had revealed that my father's professional reputation was built partially on deception, just like his family man image was built on selective attention to whichever daughter required less emotional effort. I texted back. Interesting. Natural consequences tend to multiply. The truth was, I'd done nothing except stop pretending my father was someone he wasn't. And in the absence of my protection, his actual character had been revealed. That wasn't revenge. That was reality. My departure for Oxford was scheduled for August 15th. In the weeks leading up to my flight, my family's situation deteriorated rapidly. My father's sabbatical became an immediate termination when the full scope of his professional misrepresentation emerged. Brightwell Consulting couldn't afford to keep someone who'd falsified contribution records, regardless of his previous reputation. The termination came with no severance package due to violation of ethics clauses. My mother called me crying, explaining they'd need to sell the house in Brookline. They'd been living well beyond their means for years, maintaining appearances that my father's inflated income had funded. Without that income and with Amy's continued financial drain, they couldn't sustain their lifestyle. We might have to move to a smaller place in Quincy, my mother sobbed over the phone. Near Amy's apartment. Your father can't even look at me. He's aged 10 years in 2 months. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said, and I meant it. I didn't enjoy their suffering. I simply didn't feel responsible for preventing it. Victoria, please, talk to Dr. Whitmore. Tell him your father has learned his lesson. Tell him we're a family worth saving. A family worth saving, I repeated slowly. When was I worth saving, Mom? When you missed my rhodes ceremony? When you spent my childhood telling me Amy needed more attention because she was struggling? When was I enough of a priority to save? That's different. You were always fine. You never needed us the way Amy did. I was fine because I had to be, because you made it clear that needing you wasn't an option for me. She was quiet for a long moment. You're not going to help us, are you? I'm going to let you experience what it feels like to need help desperately, and have family choose other priorities. That's what you've given me, Mom. I'm just returning it. My father didn't call again, but Amy did, her voice shrill with rage. You selfish bitch. Dad lost his job because of you. We're losing the house because of you. All because you couldn't get over one missed ceremony. Grow up, Victoria. I'm not the one who's 23 and never passed a college semester, Amy. Perhaps we have different definitions of growing up. At least I have a heart. At least I care about family. You care about family supporting you unconditionally regardless of your behavior. That's not the same as caring about family. She screamed something incoherent and hung up. I blocked her number permanently. Professor Morrison invited me to lunch 3 weeks before my departure. We sat at Chez Henri, and she was characteristically direct. I've heard through professional channels about your father's situation. I want to make sure you're all right. I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. I have clarity now. She nodded slowly. Victoria, I'm going to tell you something I don't share with many people. My father was a federal judge. Brilliant legal mind, respected by everyone. He also missed my law school graduation because my brother needed bail money for his third DUI. My father spent that day at the police station managing my brother's crisis while I walked across the stage alone. I set down my fork. What did you do? I stopped trying to earn his approval. I built a career that didn't need his validation or connections. And when he eventually needed something from me, professional advice for a case, I politely declined. Not out of spite, but because I'd learned that some relationships are fundamentally transactional and pretending otherwise only hurts you. Did he understand why you said no? Eventually. About 15 years later, when he was dying, he apologized. Said he'd failed me by treating me like I didn't need him just because I could function without him. I accepted his apology, but I didn't regret my choices. The boundary I'd set had forced him to see what he'd done. She leaned forward slightly. You're at a crossroads, Victoria. You can maintain this boundary or you can soften it for family peace. Neither choice is wrong, but you need to understand what each costs. Maintaining the boundary costs you the fantasy of a close family. Softening it costs you self-respect, and the lesson they desperately need to learn. That's not much of a choice. No, she agreed, but it's the one you have. 2 days later, Dr. Whitmore invited me to his office at Boston University. His space was elegant, filled with books and artifacts from his decades in academia. He poured us both tea from an antique service before settling into his chair. Your father came to see me yesterday, he said without preamble. He asked me to write him a recommendation for positions he's applying for. I declined. I wrapped my hands around the warm teacup. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that my professional assessment of your father is independent of you. You're not responsible for his career destruction, Victoria. His own choices, both personal and professional, created this situation. The misrepresentation of work contributions would have emerged eventually regardless of any family drama. But the timing was accelerated because your absence at the ceremony triggered questions that led to deeper scrutiny. But the underlying rot was always there. He sipped his tea thoughtfully. Your father built a career on an image that didn't match reality. That's unsustainable in the long term. You didn't destroy him. You just stopped helping maintain the facade. He thinks I'm punishing him, perhaps, but punishment would require you to actively harm him. You've simply stepped back and allowed natural consequences to occur. There's a profound difference. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he continued. I've been thinking about my own role in this. I mentored your father 30 years ago. I saw potential in him, but I also saw warning signs I chose to ignore. He was always calculating, always positioning himself strategically rather than substantively. I told myself it was ambition, but it was actually something less admirable. Why are you being so honest with me? Because you deserve honesty from at least one adult authority figure in your life. And because I see in you what I hoped to see in your father but never did, genuine integrity rather than performed values. He set down his teacup. When you return from Oxford, you'll have opportunities your father couldn't dream of because you've built your success on actual merit. That's the difference between you. His foundation was always unstable. Yours is solid. On my last day in Boston, I visited my parents' house to collect some final belongings. The for sale sign on the lawn looked almost surreal. My mother answered the door, looking exhausted. Come in quickly. Your father is sleeping. He's barely getting out of bed most days. Inside, the house I'd grown up in looked diminished somehow. The expensive furniture and artwork now just objects waiting to be sold. Amy sat on the couch eating takeout, her expression sullen. I'll be quick, I said, heading toward my old room. My mother followed me. Victoria, please. Before you leave for England, can't we find some peace? Can't we fix this? I turned to face her in the hallway. What exactly would fixing this look like, Mom? Me calling Dr. Whitmore and lying about who Dad is? Me pretending the past 22 years didn't happen so you can maintain your lifestyle? I'm talking about forgiveness, about being a family. We were never the family you're imagining. We were a performance of a family, and I was always backstage watching you celebrate Amy's mediocrity while dismissing my excellence as expected. I'm done performing. So we're just done? You're leaving for Oxford and that's it? I'm leaving for Oxford to build a life based on authentic connections and earned success. Whether we're done is up to you. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be honest. No more pretending, no more performance, No more asking me to prioritize your comfort over my truth. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time I felt something other than anger. I felt sadness for what we could have been if they'd chosen differently, if they'd valued both daughters equally, if they'd recognized that I needed them even when I could function without them. But sadness wasn't the same as obligation to fix their mistakes. I collected my things quickly. A few books, some photos I wanted to keep, documents I'd need for Oxford. As I was leaving, my father emerged from the bedroom, looking haunted. "Victoria." "Wait," I paused at the door. "I understand now," he said quietly. "What I did to you. How it felt to build everything yourself and have the people who should care most treat it like it didn't matter. I understand. Do you? I'm living it now. Every door I knock on, closed. Every call I make, ignored. Every connection I thought was solid, suddenly unavailable. I'm experiencing what you experienced for 22 years. The difference is, I deserve this. You didn't." It was the first genuine thing he'd said to me in months. Maybe years. But recognition without meaningful change was just another performance. "I hope you learn from this experience, Dad." "I genuinely do. But my forgiveness isn't required for your growth. You need to figure out who you want to be, regardless of whether I ever trust you again." I walked out of that house for the last time before Oxford, leaving behind the family that had failed me and stepping toward the future I'd built alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Flight tomorrow? Want company for the airport?" "Yes to company," I texted back. "And thanks for being actual family." The next morning, Sarah drove me to Logan International. We sat in the departure terminal, and she handed me a small wrapped gift. "Don't open it until you're on the plane." I hugged her tightly. "Take care of yourself. And remember, you don't owe your family peace at the expense of your truth either. I learned from watching you," she said. "You're terrifying and inspiring in equal measure." On the plane, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, I opened Sarah's gift. Inside was a framed quote from Margaret Atwood. "You're sad because you're sad. You're not sad because of how sad other people are. You're allowed to be happy even when others are not." I sat there holding that frame, understanding that Sarah had seen what I needed to hear. I wasn't responsible for my family's pain. I hadn't caused it. I'd simply stopped absorbing it. My first semester at Oxford exceeded every expectation. Professor David Sterling, whom Dr. Whitmore had introduced me to, became an invaluable mentor. The research assistant position morphed into a co-authorship opportunity on a paper about corporate governance and family business succession. By October, we'd submitted it to the Harvard Business Review. Professor Morrison emailed me in November with remarkable news. "Victoria, I don't know if you're aware, but your father has been submitting applications to mid-level consulting positions at smaller firms. 3 different organizations have contacted me for references. I've been honest about my inability to recommend him. I wanted you to know in case this creates further family complications." It did. My mother sent an email, subject line, "Please." And in it, she detailed their financial situation with painful specificity. They'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Quincy, downscaled dramatically. My father was substitute teaching at a local high school, using his economics background to stay financially afloat. Amy had finally been forced to get a full-time job at a retail store since their financial support evaporated. "Your father asks about you constantly," my mother wrote. "Checks your social media, reads anything published under your name. He's proud of you, Victoria, even if he destroyed any right to tell you that. I'm not asking for forgiveness anymore. I'm just asking you to understand that we're broken people who broke you, and we're living with those consequences every single day." I didn't respond, but I did think about what Professor Morrison had told me about her father's eventual apology. The difference was, her father had apologized while dying. Mine was apologizing while experiencing consequences. There was a distinction there that mattered. In December, the Harvard Business Review accepted our paper for publication. Professor Sterling credited me as co-author, a massive achievement for someone still in their first year at Oxford. Dr. Whitmore sent a congratulatory email and mentioned, almost casually, that he'd be at Oxford for a conference in January. "Would love to catch up and hear how you're settling in." We met at the Eagle and Child, the historic pub where C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien used to meet. Over coffee, Dr. Whitmore updated me on Brightwell Consulting's evolution and the local Boston legal community. Then he said, "Your father sent me a letter. 20 pages, handwritten, half apology for his professional misrepresentations, half request that I mentor him through rebuilding his career. What did you say?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Not because you control my decision, but because I respect your insight. What do you think he deserves?" I watched the winter rain through the pub window. I think he deserves the same chance anyone else would get. If you choose to mentor him, do it based on whether you think he's genuinely changed, not out of obligation to some past connection or consideration for me, but understand that rebuilding trust takes years, and he's starting from negative equity. Dr. Whitmore nodded slowly. That's remarkably fair. More fair than I expected, honestly. I don't need him to suffer forever. I just needed him to understand the weight of his choices. If he's learning, if he's changing, that's his journey. It doesn't require my participation or forgiveness. Back in my Oxford flat, I received a Facebook friend request from Amy. The accompanying message said simply, "I got a promotion to assistant manager. First time I've ever worked for something. Weird feeling. Thought you might understand." I didn't accept the request, but I did respond. Congratulations. Hard work does feel different than entitlement. I hope you keep experiencing it. By May, my first year at Oxford had established me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd presented research at 2 international conferences, built relationships with scholars across Europe, and secured a summer internship at a prestigious international law firm in London. Professor Morrison called to inform me that Harvard Law had accepted me into their JD program starting after my Oxford degree, with a full scholarship and a research position in her corporate law clinic. Victoria, I want to be clear that this acceptance has nothing to do with any family dynamics. Your academic record, your research, your recommendations from Oxford faculty, these earned you this spot. You should be extraordinarily proud. Thank you, Professor. That means more than you know. In late May, I received an unexpected email from my father. Subject line, "No response required. Victoria, I'm writing this not to ask anything of you, but because I need to say it. Dr. Whitmore declined to mentor me, but his refusal letter explained why in a way that finally made me understand. He wrote that I'd spent 30 years building a professional identity based on image rather than substance, and that the same pattern existed in my personal life. He was right. I treated you like you didn't need me because it was easier than admitting I didn't know how to be what you needed. I treated Amy like she was fragile because fixing her crises made me feel necessary. Neither approach was about seeing either of you clearly. I'm teaching high school economics now. 10th graders, they're smart and honest and completely willing to tell me when I'm full of it. It's humbling. I'm starting to understand what actual teaching requires versus performing expertise. Your mother and I are in couples therapy. She's also in individual therapy dealing with her own patterns. Amy is living independently for the first time, struggling but growing. I look at what you've built alone, everything you accomplished while I was too blind to see it properly, and I'm in awe of you. Not in a way that requires your acknowledgement, but in a way that makes me wish I could go back and be different. Since I can't, I'm trying to be different going forward. You owe me nothing. Not forgiveness, not communication, not consideration. I'm writing this purely to tell you that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took losing everything to understand that. Your proud but undeserving father. I read it 3 times, analyzing it the way I'd analyze a legal brief. The language was different, less performative, more genuine. But words without sustained action were meaningless, and I wouldn't know if his changes were real for years. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. In June, Sarah visited me at Oxford for a week. We toured the colleges, attended a formal hall dinner at my residential college, and spent long evenings talking about family, trauma, and building lives that weren't defined by other people's limitations. Your dad's letter, she said one evening as we walked along the Cherwell River. Are you going to respond eventually? I don't know. Maybe in a few years if his actions match his words. But I don't feel urgency about it anymore. I've stopped waiting for them to become the parents I needed. I'm building something new instead. That's healthy. Also terrifying. Why terrifying? Because you're completely comfortable walking away from people who hurt you, even family. Most people can't do that. They need the fantasy of reconciliation too much. I thought about that. I don't need the fantasy because I have the reality of genuine relationships now. You, Professor Morrison, Dr. Whitmore, the colleagues I've met here. These are people who see me clearly and choose to support me anyway. That's not something I'm willing to compromise for people who only valued me once I stopped being available. As my first year at Oxford concluded, I received notice that the paper Professor Sterling and I had co-authored was being cited in several upcoming textbooks on corporate governance. My name was becoming known in academic circles, my research building a foundation for the legal career I envisioned. I thought about my parents sometimes, wondering if they'd truly changed or if the current contrition was just another performance. But mostly I thought about the future I was building, brick by brick. through genuine effort and authentic relationships. The Rhodes Scholarship ceremony they'd missed had been the beginning of my liberation, not my destruction. By choosing Amy's temporary drama over my permanent achievement, they'd finally shown me clearly where I stood in their priorities. And that clarity, painful as it was, had freed me to stop seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. I graduated from Oxford 2 years later with distinction. My parents didn't attend because I didn't invite them. Professor Morrison flew over to watch me receive my degree, and Dr. Whitmore sent an enormous bouquet of flowers with a note. To the brilliant young woman who understood that respect must be earned, not assumed. Congratulations on everything you've become. Amy sent a text on graduation day. Mom showed me your ceremony photos. You look really happy. Different than before, like you're not carrying something heavy anymore. I responded simply, I'm not. The heaviness I'd carried for 22 years, the weight of trying to earn love from people who'd made their priorities clear through consistent action, that burden had finally lifted. Not because they'd changed, but because I'd stopped believing their validation mattered. I was building something better, something authentic, something that didn't require me to minimize myself to make others comfortable. And if my family eventually joined that new life in meaningful ways, fine. But if they didn't, I'd discovered something profound. I didn't need them to be whole. The daughter who'd stood alone at the Rhodes ceremony was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood her worth, chose her relationships carefully, and refused to accept less than she deserved from anyone. And that woman was absolutely unstoppable.